Welcome to the Fi Guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Today, I'm going to be introducing you to my great friend, John Grace, a fellow financial advisor with decades of experience in the industry. Our conversation is going to envelop a myriad of different topics, so please stick around till the end to figure out everything that we're going to talk about. But just to give you a quick preview, we're going to be talking about why the average American gets an F rather than an A on their financial literacy. We're going to be talking about what retirees can do to diversify their income so they're not going to be subject to the next huge stock market crash. And I think most importantly, we're going to be talking to those millennials who are thinking about purchasing their first home. And we're going to be talking about maybe right now is not the right time. If we hold off a little bit longer, might be the perfect time to purchase a home. This is the Fi Guys. Let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so happy to welcome my guest here, John Grace. John has been a financial advisor for quite a while now. John, would you mind telling the people a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Chris, and I just want you to know how glad I am to be on this podcast with you. You know, one of my favorite lines, Chris, is from George, one of the commanders in the World War II, where he said that, you know, when everybody's thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. And I think he knew exactly what he was talking about. So what I appreciate about you is that you do the work that is better than the average bear, if you will, in that you do your own thinking, you make your own assessments, you do your homework. You're just not repeating what the higher ups have told you to say, which as far as a little introduction, what I noticed with the industry is that we were taught to say what we're supposed to repeat. That's approved information. And many times that results in us advocating the same thing that everybody else is saying. Nothing is customized. And we sound like we haven't learned anything because we're saying the same thing 23, 43 years later that we were taught in the first year. And clearly, everything has changed. So the way I got into business is I happened to be best man in a Jewish wedding. And the groom and the family lived in the Marina del Rey, you know, in Southern California. And the father was in the business, and he told his son, "Hey, I might want to talk to him because I think he might be able to be a financial advisor." So he sat me down, and I was very interested. And he said, "I'm willing to be your mentor." And I'm like, "How much blood do you want? Let's go." And you know, sometimes, Chris, it's better to be lucky than good. It just so happened that he was with the largest independent financial planning firm in the country at the time, which means that they weren't invested in insurance, they weren't vested in stocks. They wanted to put a financial plan in place. If you live too long or die too soon, that was the job, not just sticking product in people's pockets. And so I was very fortunate to start in that way, because as you know, so many people started in stocks or they started in insurance, and now they have to unlearn some bad habits that they're pretty well set, those habits, to try and really do an equitable and appropriate job for the client. Turns out, just in 2019, I was flying up to Portland for a conference, and I was on the phone with the groom's son in Boston, who said he wanted to become a financial advisor. And I go, "Hey, look, whatever I can do, you can count on it. I'm here for you." It's funny how things go full circle. And by the way, I happen to know that you never met your grandfather. So I can tell you some stories about your grandfather nobody else can tell you because it was just me and him in the room. So, you know, it was, as I say, full circle. Who would have thought it works out like that? But sometimes that's what life has in the dealt in the cards, and you just want to play the hand and figure out, well, your grandfather helped me, it's my turn to help you. So does that give you a little sense of how we got started?
That does, and I find that very interesting. How old were you when you were the best man inside that wedding? That person that this another advisor saw something in you, and in addition to how old you were, did you ever talk to to your mentor and ask them what is it that they saw in you in that moment that
You know
said
what?
this guy right here?
Yeah, I never asked that question. I think what I understood from the son is he would hear conversations and maybe he gleaned something that I said that kind of makes sense. And, you know, I've been blessed with pretty good diction. That might have been what he picked up on. I'm not sure. I never asked that question. We did not have that conversation, but that would have been a good question for me to pose.
Yeah, that would have been. It's okay. That's totally fine. I mean, now we know. Now, if you when you mentor your the grandson, you can tell him like, "Hey, this is the reason that I'm doing all this stuff," and now he's going to know what you saw in him.
Yeah.
That's going to lead
That
to
was
it.
that was a great conversation. And by the way, let me finish the quote. It was George Patton, If everybody's
Yes.
thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. I think he nailed it because I think that's what we do too much of. And you might appreciate, Chris, that I have a new favorite T-shirt. It says "Make America Think Again." Yeah, that's what we need. That's what we need. We need a little critical thinking. I thought we were getting good at that, but somehow we've slipped into darkness. It's one of my favorite songs, "Slipping into
Oh
Darkness."
yeah.
Okay, yeah,
We
we're
have slipped
sliding
into a deep
backwards.
hole.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat what I want to hear because it just sounds good to me, and that's the way it should be. And now I have permission to throw you under the bus.
So I'm always interested to find out how financial advisors, because I find this financial advice to be a very noble profession for a select few people who are coming in here who truly want to help the world, truly want to help individuals. So what's your first money memory, John? What's the first thing you remember? Maybe your parents teaching you. Do you remember any of that things?
Here's where it gets even more interesting. And I appreciate financial intelligence. I think appreciate financial independence. This is around the 4th of July, right? And it's been what, 248 years that we are celebrating our independence from Great Britain. Well, we want to do that with being financially independent as well, right? I concur with what you're saying. What I found is that when I entered into getting my first securities license, I walked into the room. It was on Figueroa and Wilshire. Dave Carmanecki was the instructor. And two parts here. When I was signing out, he says, "I was looking forward to meeting you." And I'm like, "Why?" He said, "What's your name?" I go, "Okay." He said, "What? You know what grace means, don't you?" And I go, "No." He goes, "Well, it means unmerited favor." And I go, "Okay, that's good." He says, "You don't get it yet, do you?" I said, "No, but I can feel it coming." He says, "Yeah, unmerited favor means you get something you don't deserve." And I'm like, "That's interesting. Where were you when I was in the Boy Scouts?" And I took a whole lot of crap for having a girl's last name. That's where I was. But, as I was talking to him, I says, "Listen, you need to know something." Saying, "We're going to have a conversation." I walk in this room and I immediately see I do not belong here. Now, I was probably revealing something that maybe I wasn't even aware of. And, was this bad belief that I wasn't enough, I wasn't as good. All of these guys who don't look like you or me, I'm sure they grew up on the Wall Street Journal. They got Business Week, they got Forbes. I got, Life and Look and the LA Times. It wasn't the Journal, right? So I immediately felt like they were much further ahead than I would ever get to, and I'm just revealing the how low opinion I had of myself that I wasn't good enough. So it took me a while to really look in the mirror and go, that was a really dumb statement you made. And when you make a
Yes.
statement like that, guess what your mind does? It fills in the blanks as to why that statement is valid, because that's all the known, right? Well, you got this reason, you didn't grow and your father didn't. Okay, stop it. Here's the question. How do you become competitive? And so I said, that's a good question. That's an open-ended question. And then my next question was, I get it. I know what I need to do. I need to figure out what's average. Hmm, if I can discern what's average, then I can talk about that. And then we can highlight how some people do better than average. That's a good question. So, took a couple of securities exams, one of them a supervisory, Series 24. Now I get to look at
Hmm.
other people's work. I get to talk to other branch managers about their representatives' work. And now we can see what is average. And that prompted me to identify a new opportunity. It was opportunity to become a master certified by paying a fee and taking a test with Dent Research, becoming a founding member with Dent Research so that we could really see what works in the economy. We'll talk about that. But it's not about sales data. It's not about interest rates. It's not about location. It's not about inventory. That's the stuff we've been taught. No, it's about discovering, probably for the first time, what the buying and selling behavior of ordinary consumers are based on age. And that's the piece of the puzzle that most of us miss. It's so fascinating to talk to people and ask them, when do you imagine you ate the most potato chips in life? And they kind of chuckle, but nobody really knows the answer. I'm like, well, thanks to our tax dollars at work, it's called the Census Bureau, probably can trust their data. We now can see two pieces of this puzzle. One, we ate the most potato chips at 14. And as adults, we bought the most potato chips at 41 for our 14-year-olds. Next question. Okay. I mean, that's really interesting to see. That's the pattern that we've all been in, but we didn't even recognize it. So now we can see as a beginning that there are a lot of patterns that we're involved in that we don't really see, like real estate. Oh, it's about interest rates, location, and inventory. Well, that's what we've been told. But no, it's about more than that. Let's get to the bottom line. Think of it this way. This was actually a case study, Chris. This was a company called Japs before World War II, and they changed the name to Jay's. This is a true story in the Midwest. And in the Midwest, apparently, the potato chip company was family owned, family recipe. The cat's meow when it comes to potato chips in the Midwest. So the board of directors, the family sat down and said, wow, our sales are so good. We need to expand. Well, you now know the piece of the puzzle nobody asked, and so nobody answered. All these bright people, big hearts, love what they're making. People are consuming it in great amounts, and so they decide to expand, take in more debt, buy more trucks, have more room, get more bank loans, but no one thought to look to see what's happening with 14-year-olds in the areas that we serve. Are they increasing in number or not? They missed that. So the company got sold. It was bought back by the family. Then it was sold off again. Now it's part of the conglomerate. I understand. Went to school in the Midwest, so they're still good potato chips, but it's not family owned because no one looked to see the lowest common denominator. If it is the case that 14-year-olds consume the most potato chips in life, and we don't see that the number of 14-year-olds in the communities we serve are plateauing and declining, thanks to looking at the Census Bureau for the area, you can see births. Oh, nobody studied that. We probably should have hunkered down, pay down debt, maybe look at expanding to other communities outside the ones that we're comfortable with if we want to sell more product, because the number of people in our communities, they're just not as many as they were. So the ability to sell more potato chips in that reality, it didn't happen. The rest is history.
So I certainly want to get more into the economic side, more into the investment side. But before we do that, you said something during that when you first walked into that room a long time ago when you met your teacher.
Oh yeah,
And
I was
for those of you
25 to
who,
answer your question. Sorry. Yes.
so you're 25, you walk into this room and you said that you look around, you look different than everyone else. And
Yep.
for those of you who are just listening to us on the podcast, John, you're not a white male, and neither am I.
Right.
We're not the average aged or middle aged white male, which is the average financial advisor.
Yeah.
So just go a little deeper into your story, John. A lot of people, myself included, when you walk into that room and you feel so alienated, so different, you start to, and you said you went through it too. Like, what's wrong with me? I'm a different
Yes.
person.
Right.
And many people quit. They quit right there because they
Yeah.
realize that these people, they have a different language than me. They have a different look than me. And I remember for myself, in my first firm that I ever worked for, I was trying to work my way up to a financial advisor and try to sit down with clients.
Right.
And my boss was fine to let me be on the phone with them. He was fine with that. And, I was the one making the financial plans. I was good at that. And I was like, hey, I want to sit down with these clients. This is silly. I'm doing all this stuff. Why can't I see them? And he goes, well, Chris, the big issue is that your age, you're too young, and you don't look the right way. You don't look what they're trying to do. And I heard him, and I was like, I don't get what you're saying.
What do you
I
say?
dress nice. If
Right.
I'm wearing the suit, like you want me to wear a suit, I'm wearing a suit.
Right.
I understand that I'm young. I really can't do anything about that.
It's going to go
But
away.
are you trying to say that I'm not white? Is that what you're
Right.
trying to
Yeah,
say?
is that what you're really telling me? You're trying to be
Yeah.
polite, but I think I heard what you were saying, and that's not
Mhm.
going to change. And I think the good news, yeah, it's not Wisconsin in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, or 80s. Okay, and I had a very interesting conversation with my uh, Kenny, who became a friend uh, from Kentucky, and I was explaining to him that, geez, Kenny, if we're looking at the numbers for Caucasians, it's not what it used to be. Do you guys not like each other the way you used to? Because your numbers are going down. And like it or not, understand it or don't, there's a browning of America, and in fact, a browning in the world. And so you guys' numbers seem to be going down, my friend, and the brown people's numbers seem to be going up. So I'm afraid that some of the industry is still stuck like it's the 50s. And frankly, as you know, we like to say the right words. But in reality, many of the companies still look like it's the 1950s in Wisconsin or even all around the country. Certainly the browning of America is occurring. In fact, my wife works at a private school, and I was interested in the demographics of the school. You start looking at everything differently. And I'm going back to the headmaster saying, are you aware that 25% of your population is multiracial?
Mhm.
No, see, it happens right before you. It wasn't like anybody was out to make that happen. That's called nature. That's how it's happening. And it's happening in real time. And some people have a problem with it. But as I say, like it or not, don't understand it or don't, that's what's happening in this country and around the world in real time. It's not stopping here.
Yeah. And what is it, John, that you think separated you from the average person that would walk into that room, see all these people, be told by your instructor that maybe you shouldn't really be here?
Yeah.
Not in that words, but he said like the only reason you're here is for whatever reason. Your name just basically means that we're going to give it to you. What kept you sticking around where most people would just say like, "F this this isn't for me," and
Well,
leave?
I guess I must be stubborn as you know what, right? And I do believe that there is a real opportunity to work with people, not help them. Nobody wants to be helped unless I say, Chris, I need your help. That's different. And we like to say we help people, and we really do, but they don't really want help. There's some people who do, and a lot of people who don't, because the status quo is so darn comfortable. Inertia is the resistance to movement. It's the world's greatest force. But there's something really a lot of fun with helping people see for themselves what has to happen to achieve financial independence on your time. And what has to happen in the event, heaven forbid, they've got two breadwinners, married or not, either one of them go to heaven financially. There is a way to assess what needs to happen so that the survivor can have the kind of income he or she needs after this person has gone to heaven, so that basically I can miss you. Maybe I won't, maybe I will, but I don't want to miss your money. All right. If I'm used to $40,000, it means that for the person who's making the 40,000, that I so need every cent of that. Using the 4% rule, that means I need $1 million on you. And what's so fascinating, I know you see this too, where people go, "Oh, Chris, well, I'm worth more dead than alive. We got 500 on her and 500 on me. We're good." And you're like, let's do the numbers. 4% on 500. Oh, that's 20,000. Is that enough? You needed 40. You're only 50% there. You want to deplete the 500,000? Well, let's see. If you have to take out $40,000 a year, how long will that last you? Well, I don't think it's going to last you maybe 10, 12 years, maybe a little
Yep.
bit longer than that. But you can see the money's going to be depleted. And what we want you to do is make sure that you can see that this money is working for you. The yield is where it needs to be. And there might be even some growth on top of what you're taking out. But in the first 30 days, you might miss the breadwinner. You won't miss their money. You'll be fine on that end. The emotional part, you can probably deal with because you don't have to cry over the money went to heaven.
Yeah. Now I noticed you've said 4% a few times there. I'm guessing you're citing the Trinity study. Would you mind explaining to the audience why you used 4%, right? And what someone who heard that might glean from that wisdom?
Good question. Yeah, what they're saying is if an account is adequately diversified, and let's say it's netting 6 or 7 or 8% per year on average, numbers wax and wane. But if your withdrawal rate is lower than your return, then you're probably safe. And this needs to be evaluated once a year because these assumptions, things do change. But yeah, with you, if you need $40,000 out, it means you want to put $1 million in, keep the yield at 4%, build that so that maybe it's built around income first and growth second. So that if you're using stocks, for example, you're primarily looking at dividend producing stocks as opposed to growth stocks. NVIDIA is not where you want to put $1 million, right? Unless you're willing to watch it blow up right before your very eyes. You probably want to make it more conservative. But again, yeah, keep the yield if you can at about 4%, keep the return higher than that on a net basis. And that means, this $1 million might even grow over time to offset inflation so that you can maintain the same standard of living. It's not a guarantee. It is a guideline, something that
Yes.
kind of helps process thinking, I think is a good way to put it.
I think that's very important. I always say that, the 4% rule it gives you direction. It
Yeah.
is not the end all be all, but it gives you,
Yeah.
this is the number that I'm heading towards.
Yeah. It's not the Bible. Okay. It's
No.
not the Ten Commandments. It's a
Yeah.
guideline,
Yeah. I
and
always say,
sometimes it needs to be adjusted. Yes.
yeah, I always say that we're the financial independence guys. That's our thing. And I always tell people, like, once you get to 25 times your income and you have that in an investment account, that doesn't mean that you just get to go and burn all the boats. That means that you need to, yeah, let's set up a real plan.
Yes.
Again, you've hit a number. That's great and all, but before we burn the boats, let's make sure that we have a real plan in place.
Right. Right. What are we going to do when the boat is gone? Can you
Yeah.
swim?
Yeah. Can you swim? So before we get into the financial parts, I just have one other question. So the only advisors that I'm willing to bring onto the podcast are advisors who think a little bit different than me. And in our first call that we ever had, we talked a lot about the issues, the reason that financial advisors, unfortunately, are one of the most hated professions here in America. And you and I kind of got onto a tit for tat over all the issues that we see in our industry.
Right.
Could you maybe elaborate on some of the issues so that, my audience has heard me rant 20 different times on the issues with advisors. So maybe you could share something, maybe a different insight or a different thing that you've seen in your life as to why advisors aren't looked at the way that we want to view ourselves.
Yeah, it may have something to do, particularly with millennials, Chris, with there were what, not one, but two 50% losses in the same decade. We had one 0002 and then another one 0809. And let's be clear, if you're making contributions to your account or you don't need the money, who cares? If you're making contributions, that's actually a benefit to you, right? Because you're
Yeah.
stacking up more shares at cheaper prices, kind of like getting more shells when the tide is out. That's a good thing when the market is off. But if you are retired and you're in your 70s, and we're talking about your 401k might have been rolled over into an IRA, and now you have to take distributions that do what? Only increase every year for the rest of your life. And yes, no, there's no way to offset the taxes. You're going to pay the tax whenever you take out a dime. But most folks are not aware that this withdrawal rate is called required minimum distributions. That's what it's called, RMD. What the government says, the IRS says, is that you might be starting at 3.5% at 72, 73, stick around in your 80s, and now it's over 6, 7, 8%. Each year, the withdrawal rate goes up regardless of what your account does. So my point is the industry has gone to great lengths to advocate stocks for the long haul, sit and take it, hold and hope. It's not timing, it's time in the market. All those things are supposed to be the things that you depend on. And, maybe that's true, as I say, when you don't need the money, but when you need the money or you want the money consistently, now we need to move from the space of, I think it's arrogant of us to say, Chris, you get to live with the losses, when in fact, there are ways where you might be able to limit those losses. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Warren Buffett said something back in February that we all should pay homage to. It was a statement, and Buffett doesn't tend to be, he doesn't jump up and down. He's not the excitable kind. But one of the things he said was when he was being acknowledged for Berkshire Hathaway Holdings approaching $1 trillion in market value, he said, that's pretty good. But if we had limited our losses, the value could very well be twice as much. Now, I'm doing backflips because this is from a very credible source. And what he said that the industry just does not say that, don't just live with the losses. Let's see what you can do to limit those losses so that you don't need a Hail Mary pass just to get back in the game. We were working with a referral, Chris, where we did something unusual. We took her portfolio and ran it backwards, assuming that in the statement that she presented, she held the same stocks or ones identical to the position she's holding today back in 2008. You know the numbers. Mark was off 37, the Vanguards, the ETFs, the stock funds were off about 40, 42. Her account was off 70%. So, folks, that means Chris can tell you, you started with $1 million, minus 70, that's 700,000. You're left with 300,000. Have a nice day.
Yeah, your
Or
retirement's going to look a lot different than you planned.
man, the plane's coming down and it's not going to be a soft landing. All right. If you're taking withdrawals. Now, the good news about this particular woman, and by the way, I said, hey, you've been to over 70 countries and you're in your 70s. Tell me where you're going next. I'll carry your bags because you know how to roll. Okay. I'm impressed by you. But the good news for her, as we were talking to her son, who was the one who said, take a look at mom's account. Well, it turns out he's been carrying all of her expenses. She lives with him.
Mm.
He's paying, yeah. So she was fine. This is extra money for her, yeah. But for the rest of us, this isn't extra money. This is all there is. And if we went from 1 million, and now let's see, Chris, to go back a bit, 4% of 1 million is 40. Well, let's see. You might be able to help the audience out here along with myself. Once the account gets down to 300,000, if she's still used to 40,000, what does that withdrawal have to do? It probably has to what, double from 4 to
Yeah.
8%, something like that. Chris will check
Yep.
our work. Now, the account got crushed by, in fact, it probably has to be more than double. But anyway, even if it's just a double, after you're down to 300,000 and you're taking $24,000 out, 8% of 300,000 is 24,000. You're still not at 40. You can see what's happening here. This plane is
Yes.
coming down. It's going to be difficult to have a nice day. We don't want to watch that happen.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the audience, maybe who is closer to retirement, or maybe they're in retirement and they hear you and they say, like, "Oh my goodness, maybe am I taking on too much risk?
Yeah.
This is scary. John's scaring me. What can I do as the layman person to limit my losses
Yes.
and maybe lead to a more comfortable retirement?"
Great question. And the first thing I would say is just notice what we were talking about. It's something most investors don't do, and neither do our peers, the advisors. We don't go back to see how bad it got. This is my line. I made it up. Americans don't learn anything from history because we're too darn busy repeating history. We go, well, the account's back. It's higher than it's ever been. Uh, what did it do to you? How did you get kicked in the assets? Will this happen again? Could it be worse the next time? I'm not saying, be scared. I'm saying let's open our eyes and be aware. If we can look at the past and learn from the past, we may feel like we can do something along the lines that Warren Buffett effectively instructed us to see how we can limit the losses. So this isn't just theory. Because of the research that we pay for, Chris, we were fortunate enough. I actually went to another workshop, and this gentleman, this was late 2006, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, let's just imagine we've been through 150% loss, 2002. Suppose there's another one in the same decade. I'm on my way back to the office with our math man, Daniel Medina here, and I said, Daniel, you're good with numbers. I can only approach how good you are with numbers because I have 3 HP12Cs. But he asked a real good question, and that is, suppose there's 250% losses. Now, I've been looking at some technology. I haven't decided which ones we should use. I want you to evaluate some of the new technology that's available. You figure out which ones work, which ones you can make work, and then let's go to work with our clients to help them see how they might limit their losses. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, right? Yes. So we happened to get everything in order, and we went to our largest account at the time, $10 million pension plan. And we said, we have some ideas. This was January of 07 by the time we got ready and we could get time on their schedule. January of 07, long before 08. Again, I'm not taking credit. I'm saying I was lucky, but I'll take luck. I will take it every time I can get it. So we started going to clients saying, here's what we think you might want to do to reduce your volatility, to reduce the market losses. So in some cases, we went to folks in the Vanguards, the American Funds, the Fidelities, all the names you can name. They're all, they pay for a space in your head because they do great advertising. And some of them said, hey, we're good, because the accounts kept going up. Others said,
Yeah.
that sounds like a good idea. So we started looking at not just using passive accounts. We're all familiar with those. Let's make sure we're more familiar with them. Passive means, in most cases, if it's a stock fund, it may be 3, 4, 5% cash. It's 95% or more invested, some combination bonds or stocks. Okay, that's great when the market's hitting new highs. Not so good when the market's hitting new lows. Wile E. Coyote, how low can we go? So what we did was we started suggesting to clients who were willing to have this conversation, let's move to actively managed accounts. You remember the movie Karate Kid, wax on, wax off? Well, we want to move from the passive 5% cash, 95% invested, to active, which means that the portfolio manager's job is to look at your money every day and answer this question. Is it risk on or risk off? Do we want fuel on this fire or water on this bad boy? In '08, you wanted water. So many accounts stayed 5% cash, 95% invested. The clients that chose to go this route, not everybody did, what they found is that automatically, because the question of how much water or fuel need to be on your specific fire were answered, some folks found that their accounts ended '08 100% in cash. So the
Mhm.
folks who followed the active management strategies saw like a 19.84% loss in 2008. Again, by comparison, markets were off 37. The full-on stock funds, which most people use to still today, even boomers, because we like all those gains, they saw like a 40 to 42% loss in 2008. Now, we had a robust market after that, starting March 9th, 2009, but it took the passively managed accounts about 4 to 5 years to get back to even. The actively managed accounts were back to even in 1 or 2 years. So let's just
Yeah.
round up. I said 19.84. Let's round up to 20. You know, the math is if we're netting 25, 26 in the next year or so, we're back to even in a year or two, as opposed to needing twice that time or more, because the accounts were passive and they did rebound, but it took a while. And if you were taking withdrawals, well, guess what? You pushed that out even farther in terms of it getting back to even. So our 1-2
Yeah.
punch, Chris, is active management. And our second recommendation is that we diversify. The best way I can kind of put that in perspective is the industry has long said you're diversified with 60% stocks, 40% bonds. That's what we were taught in day one. And that's what some of us are still spouting in day
Mhm.
2000, right? Has nothing changed? Is that's as good as it gets? It's like I say, we weren't in front of the crashes, but we also didn't come behind the crashes, Chris, and go, well, here's what we learned after '02. Oh, hey, we didn't see that one coming either, but here's what we learned. We don't do that. So that's why I think these kind of conversations are magnificent for people to see. You don't have to live with the losses. Some people who are more agile and have a higher interest in limiting your losses have answers for you, or at least strategies that you can consider. So active management, number one, greater diversification, number two. And I like to talk about, I'll ask you, I like to talk about the Yale Endowment. You may have looked at it, wouldn't be surprised if you had, but play along with me if you would. I'm going to ask you, have not asked this question before, so Chris doesn't know what I'm going to say. The question is, if you're looking at the Yale Endowment, it's what, $40.7 billion, something like that.
Yep.
What do you imagine or think they have in US stocks as a percentage?
3%.
3%. Go to the head of the class. No one answers that question, folks. Okay. Chris goes to the head of class. He's paying attention. Only 3%. And if you pour through their site, what they reflect is this is how we used to do it, 60/40. This isn't how we
Mhm.
do it anymore. And in '08, most people lost money. Most people leave. There was nowhere to hide. According to their site, we didn't lose any money in 2008. Now, I'm going to believe them, but the point is there something you could do to reduce the losses? And notice that their exposure to US stocks is very, very low. The next thing I notice when I look at the portfolio, and they do a report about once a year, so they don't really tell you everything. Only one at a time do you get a looky loo. But I find
Mhm.
5 to 6 different legs underneath their portfolio. 5 or 6, not two, 60, 40, 40, 60. I don't care
Yep.
which way you cut it. That's
Not just
two.
stocks and bonds.
Not just stocks and bonds, and their largest position last time I looked was like 17%. Well, my point is that's more legs on your stool, probably makes for a stronger stool, and you're not taking a 40 or a 60% bet on your life savings being in 8 different stocks, the ones that are the winners. You've diversified so that in '08 or 2022, as an example, you may have some losses in the bonds and the stocks along with real estate, but some other positions held up better, so that kept your losses. Let's say in 2022, market's off 20 to 30. If you're off 7 to 10, we'll just say that's hypothetical, but do your homework, because, yeah, it might be something worth looking at. Clearly, on $1 million account, you can live better with a 10% loss, 100,000, as opposed to a 20 to 30%. That's what, two to $300,000. What do they say, Chris? When you find yourself in a ditch, stop digging.
Yeah.
10%. We can stop digging at 10. We don't have to go any further. I don't want to get to 20. I don't want to get to 30 and beyond because it might not kick in the way it did to get it back. So limit the losses. We're all familiar with. You don't need that Hail Mary pass just to get back in the game.
Yeah. And would you say for people who are listening and they're like, okay, so I hear what you're saying, John, I need to get an active manager and I need to diversify. Well, I don't know what that means, diversification and active manager. Like, what are you saying there? And then
Right.
active managers, are you saying by just some random mutual fund? Because my understanding is a mutual fund is active. Or are you
Yeah.
saying that maybe if you don't know what we're talking about, this isn't the thing that you should be doing, and maybe you should be actually
Don't try this at
working with a
home.
professional?
Don't try this at home. And let's distinguish between professional management and active management. With professional management, the portfolio managers are choosing the percentage of stocks and bonds and which stocks and which bonds. But how is that any different than moving the deck chairs on the Titanic? The damn ship sank, didn't it? Yes, it did. Didn't matter which chair you were sitting in, the ship sank. So what we're saying is you want to have a different system, different people who think differently about let's take those chairs off the Titanic and go to cash. Let's get out of shares as needed, maybe daily, maybe quarterly, but not in arrears, not automatically. As I say, looking at is it risk on or risk off? And in '08, you wanted someone, let the damn Titanic sink, but take my assets off of the Titanic. Let's go to cash, where no, I'm not going to make any money, but I'm not going to lose any more money. All right, that would be a good thing. And then when the environment looks healthier for risk assets, let's go from cash back to risk assets, whatever combination of stocks and bonds that floats your boat. Let's get back in the game as we're seeing the go off to the races again. But we just don't want to sing happy days are here again. We want to be agile. We want to be adept. We want to be on top of things. We must be vigilant when it comes to our safety along with our money.
So share with me. We know, we and I both know that the Yale Endowment has only 3% in stocks and bonds, and we're talking more about diversification. So what are they making up with the other 97% of that portfolio? And can the average person just log into their Vanguard account, their Fidelity account, their Schwab account, and purchase those things to get the diversification that they are hoping for?
Yeah, it's certainly, let's see. The way we look at it is we want the reporting to be easier so that you can see how all your money's doing. And you can also see to the extent that either breadwinner lives to 100, that your chances of probability for success is north of 80%. We want to run those numbers annually to make sure we're not missing anything here, as opposed to throwing darts in the dark. So you need to hire those who have a different way of thinking, and they have to bridge different kinds of combinations, if you will, to have those various legs. There's no perfect way. There's no right way. The question is what works for you. That's the question. But you want to work with someone who can look at the myriad of options and present to you at least some things that you can consider that might be different than what you've done in the past. So I think alternatives are a big position. Private credit, private equity, those are positions that the endowments, foundations, and institutions have been in for the last 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. Some of those positions are now being made available to retail investors. We
Yep.
like those because as I was saying to a CPA client this morning, well, I'm excited about boring consistency. If we can park money anywhere where the yield is 3, 4%, and the return net to you is 10% or better, that's not for all the money, but maybe for some of the money. And what does that mean? If you have any money at 10% for 7 years, the rule of 72 suggests put in 100, you get 10 for 7 years. At 7 years, you have 200. So, if you have to take withdrawals or you want to take withdrawals and something is increasing in value potentially, as things may be coming apart at the seams, well, it's easier to look at something. Oh, it's a good example. Stocks got hurt, bonds got hit, and so did real estate. Well, it's nice to see some asset class where you go, well, it's in the black, everything else is in the red. but I can't be too depressed because something's green, something didn't lose money. This is a good thing. So it takes kind of a reorientation of our thinking, but also we need to challenge the professionals because many of us
Yeah.
are, frankly, nice people, won't embarrass you at your children's weddings. We dress well. Our kids love us. The dogs treat us well. But frankly, folks, many of us are lazy as hell. That's the truth.
Yeah. I would certainly agree with that. One thing I do is I actually coach financial advisors to be better financial advisors. And sometimes the things that some financial advisors say scare the living daylights out of me. They say, "Oh, you're also helping people do this stuff." Oh, well, that's good for them. Interesting. So one thing that I wanted to bring up for people is this really is the endowment model. And before, in order to be able to even look at some of these alternative assets, because before, what was it, 60-40 stocks and bonds? Because when stocks zigged, bonds were supposed to zag. But
Yes.
when we turned on our infinite money printer, well, now we have something called positive correlation,
Oops.
where stocks are going up, and bonds are going up, and then stocks go down and bonds going down. So the thing that was supposed to zig, the other thing was supposed to zag. Well, now both things are zigging and zagging simultaneously,
Yes.
and that makes it very difficult for the average retiree to be like, "I'm doing the stuff. I switched it. I'm doing the 40-60, whatever it is I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm watching these things go down." And I can't even get access to these other things because historically you had to be an accredited investor to even get access to private equity, get access to private credit, get access to these alternative investments that
Yes. Yeah.
now, due to the power of the internet and power of democratization of information, the average person now has access to this. But unfortunately, you just can't go on Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab and purchase these things.
No, no. Well, they're primarily, they're stock houses. Okay, they're all based on like the Merrill Lynch model back in the 20s or
Mhm.
30s. Okay, and yes, you're right. And by the way, folks, when Chris says accredited, it means that you have to have a net worth of $1 million outside of the home for us to even be able to broach the subject. That's
Mhm.
how it was even as recently as 2018, 2019. Since then, we've been keeping our eyes on and recommending some positions where uh, maybe you had to be accredited then and it was $100,000 minimum. But now there are other alternative investments that we like that take advantage of student housing, for example, and data center infrastructure, where the minimum is all of $2,500. Some of these positions are liquid, some of them are illiquid, or you have the ability to get out of it like in 90 days or so. But it's always a good idea to go kick the tires. You don't have to buy the car, but sometimes it's a good idea to see what's out there. And as I say, please, 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 if you need help, get the help, but be willing to go back to see how did your portfolio treat you in '08? How did it treat you in 2022? If you got kicked in the assets the last time, what makes you think you're 80 better prepared for the next time? And to give you some hard numbers, I know Chris wanted to go there in terms of what is our research team saying now. I like to say it's not about the prediction; it's about the preparation. And please, let's not get lost in the weeds of when is it going to happen. When's there going to be an earthquake? I don't know. Do I care? I want to be prepared for one. And if it never happens, I don't care. And if it does, I want to be able to tell the story. I want you to be able to tell the story. So what I'm trying to warm up to is the research team is saying, be not surprised to wake up in short order and see stocks off 80%, okay? And real estate perhaps simultaneously on average off 60%. I don't imagine most investors are prepared for either of those possibilities. But suppose it happens. The question becomes, how are you any better prepared? Where will you proactively put things in place that can move your money out of risk into the sidelines, off to the sidelines, so that the losses are reduced? Again, if you're off 10, as opposed to the market off 20 or 30, that's probably pretty recoverable as we get past the 20s and the 30s into the 40s and the 50s, and this poor lady at 70. Well, now the odds are just they're just not good.
Yeah, yeah, it's scary. There's so much. There's so much that we have to talk about there, and there's so many different avenues that we could go down. But in the interest of time, I'd like to move on to a different subject, if you don't mind, John.
Sure.
I'd like to discuss an article that you wrote, and I believe the title was "A Solid F," a grade most Americans and AI earn on retirement literacy. We talked a lot about about finding the right person. And for the first time in our lifetimes, we have all the information that we could ever need at our fingertips with the power of the internet. And even with all that information at our fingertips, we are now dumber than we ever have been.
Our handheld appendages called a cell phone has not been helpful. It's interesting. Some of the folks tuning in may remember, I think it was a 1981 study that asked folks, do you think you are a better than average driver? And 9 out of 10 people said yes. Well, that's statistically impossible. But it just goes to show you how we try to pat ourselves in the back. Well, I'm better than most people. I'm better than
Mhm.
average. That's what I believe. So it must be true. Well, you got to have 50 on one side, 50 on the other. And most of us are not better than above average drivers. And most of us are not better or above average investors. And this was a financial literacy test. I think it was all of 36 questions, things like Social Security and stocks and bonds, and things that we really should ace, and most of us just failed the test. I think it was a 36 on average score. And artificial intelligence also failed the test. What makes it even more interesting, the artificial intelligence was successful with passing the bar, the CPA exam, and the CFA exam, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess they had to send the artificial intelligence systems back to school so that they could get a better grade. But my real point is that I think what happens to a fault, particularly in a time like this, where it doesn't seem to matter wherever you threw a dart, the value of that investment is higher than it was, which makes you feel confident, maybe even
Like you're a
smug.
genius.
Yeah, but yeah, you're not prepared for it to turn upside down, and that's the thing. And maybe, I mean, look, Chris, you love this. I was just looking at this yesterday. It was about looking at the Japanese Nikkei 225. That's the version of the S&P 500 in Japan. And this goes to like back to 1949. I think that's when the Nikkei was established. But it looks like just a pretty darn straight line up until 12/29/89, where the Nikkei 225 reached about 40,000. That's the level it reached. Well, guess what just happened? It just got back to 40,000. Now, okay, let's put this in perspective. You put in 100 over a period of time, it grew to a million. And then you woke up, and 2 years later, the Nikkei was off 80%. That's 200,000. It sat at around 700,000 on near million high for a number of years, but it's been 35 years effectively in the toilet. And wait, this is assuming what? You didn't take out a share. You didn't need
Mhm.
$1. You had to keep your shares intact so that the $1 million, now 35 years later, would be worth $1 million. Like you didn't need any of that money for any reason whatsoever over a 35-year period. That's what I'm talking about. Suppose that happens on your watch. I'm smiling, but we all know that would not be fun. Let's see, you were 50 35 years ago. Now you're 85, and it's just gotten back to even because you didn't sell a share and you held on for that. If you had limited the
Mhm.
losses, that you didn't need to wait 35 years maybe to see your value get back to your high water.
Interesting. So we were talking a little bit about financial literacy and how we get an F and everything. What do you think? What do you think the issue is? How do we how do we fix America? How do we fix the world? How do we get people to understand that financial literacy is important and it's not as hard as people might think it is?
Well, we need to think of it like cursive. I gave a birthday card to my 18-year-old nephew, and he's like, can't read cursive. I said, excuse me? I'm sorry, what? We didn't learn, you didn't learn. Hey, you're blowing my mind, okay? So there's we got to be old school about some things. Chris, I think it's the case that math is the only four-letter word Americans are afraid to use. We need to go
Mhm.
back and do some math. We need to have literacy, financial literacy taught let's start in junior high. Let's balance the checkbook. Don't just say, well, Grandpa, just go to the ATM machine and get all the cash you need. No, it just doesn't work like that. Let's learn how to balance. Let's learn how to invest. Let's have more conversations about things that we've learned, and let's encourage each other to take the gumption of trying to put together a financial plan. Work with someone that's what they do before they put your money on X, Y, or Z, and you feel good when it went up and you don't feel so good when it goes down. Well, what's your target? At what point do you want to make work optional? Well, how old is your goal? How much money do you need in 2024 dollars so that in 25 years you can see we're on track? If we put this money to work, get this kind of return, make these kind of contributions, we're on track for $2.6 million. I know what the number might be, but you need to know what the number might be. Just like when you get on an airplane, you want to get there on time safely. You know where you are. You know where you want to be. There's no confusion here. Well, people are throwing so many darts in the dark. And as I say, we feel smart when the account goes up, but and then we get smug and complacent, frankly, and we're not prepared for it to reverse itself. And how many times do you want your assets handed to you?
Yeah. One thing that I always like to tell, or I recently did a coaching call with a young man, and I told him, the worst thing that can happen to you when you go into the stock market and you start day trading, you start thinking that you're a genius, is that you buy a stock and it goes up, because that makes you think that you're right. And most people in the stock market, they're just lucky. And it's hard with the stock market because you can be lucky for a long time. I always like to equate it to like sports. If you walk into an NFL Columbine, you try to run a 40 against a professional, you're going to lose 100% of the time. But some guy in his basement could purchase a stock randomly, go against the big hedge funds, and be right on the short term. And that short term, when he was right, make him think that I must be right all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, maybe 97% of the investors can't beat the market. I'm in the 3% that can.
I'm a winner. 9 out
Yep.
of 10 people believe we're above average drivers. Well, we're just not. And let's also understand, because some of us are do-it-yourselfers, whatever trade you're making, you're paying a fee. All right, in or out, you're paying a fee. So don't think this is free. Don't think it's. Sometimes, as I say, you get what you pay for, and sometimes you pay less and you get less. And what's most important is, did you pay so that your losses were limited? We could talk about a $4 million account, Chris, where the doctor says, "Hey, I'm in a very inexpensive stock fund. You're probably much more expensive." I say, "Okay, let's agree to that." Well, I know the fund. Let's run it backwards. Are you aware, sir, that in '08 your $4 million was off, let's see, 42%? Did you know that? Let's just stop at 40. So that means your $4 million minus 40, that's 1.6. So you're left with 2.4, right? Let's suppose that I'm 3 times more expensive than the Vanguard. By the way, we like Vanguard, we use Vanguard, but we're not in love with Vanguard, okay? So instead of being off over 40, let's say if we had been working together and you paid me 2%, you think you're only paying 1%. That's not what we charge, but let's just use those numbers. But for whatever reason, the account was down 20%. So let's see, that's 800,000. Well, that's 800,000 less than your 1.6. You were down 40%. Okay, so that's $800,000 more in your pocket. What was that worth? You tell me. But to me, I'm happy to say there are ways that you can limit those losses, and here's the evidence. $800,000 is worth keeping. That's how I see it. What do you think?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. So we just talked about a doctor with a few $1 million. Let's talk about the average person, someone who's maybe, you know, millennial, Gen X, Gen Z, whatever they're called nowadays. 20 years or more outside of their retirement or something like that, and they want to find financial success. Do you believe it's worth working with an agile investment advisor when you're in that age, when you're in that age group that I still have such a long time? I could wait through the market. Hey, 40% down. Don't worry. I know that I'm never going to buy and sell because I know that about myself. Well, you don't know who's swimming naked till the tide goes out. So you really don't know how you're going to act inside in that moment. But let's say that you are that smart person who says, I know I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Should that person still work with an advisor, even if
Well,
they have this long time horizon?
It's a great question, and Vanguard did a study, and everybody loves Vanguard, even though you'll never meet anybody from Vanguard. I would find that a fascinating statement. But this is a Vanguard study, and what it shows was that by comparing a do-it-yourselfer, someone late 30s, early 40s, where they have a time horizon of 20 to 25 years, whatever it might be, they found that it seems the report says to me that when you were working with an agile advisor, the net to the investor was an increase of 3% per year. So if you're getting a 5% on your own, but you're working with someone who's generating more like 8% net to the investor, that modest 3% difference over a 25 year period of time, starting with the same account value of, I think it was $50,000, and then reviewing your contributions, they found that the Agile investor, the investor working with the Agile advisor, saw a increase to their bottom line of the retirement pool of over $1.3 million. So sometimes, yeah, as I say, you get what you pay for. And, yeah, how much time are you spending on this? Are you really trying to do this at home as opposed to the professionals? That's all they do. But $1.3 million, whatever it takes to have that kind of an increase over and above what you were doing on your own, it might be worth something to look at. And sometimes maybe you want to go back to work where you can make real money and let the folks guide you, put a financial plan in place as opposed to, well, at this rate, this is what I'm going to reach. Well, is that enough? Is there something else you want to do here? What do you want this money to do?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Because we know that the stock market returns on average 8 to 9%. We'll give it 8%. But the average person's only getting 5%. And I think the reason for that is everyone thinks they're the next smart person. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy when it's low, I'm going to sell when it's high. And it sounds really easy when you're looking backwards on a chart and you're saying,
Yeah,
had I bought on this day and sold on this day, I would have made really, really great returns.
yeah,
But
yeah.
when you're
Or we
in the
look at
moment,
it as the last 3 years, I got 20%, but you didn't look at the 5 years before that where you were getting two. So your average is not 20, somewhere in between. But that's what I'm saying. Do your homework. Let's see what you're doing. What do you want this money to do? And are there some alternatives or some other options available to you? And by the way, for the millennials, don't do the fear of missing out when it comes to buying a house. If you heard me a little bit earlier, research says housing prices are likely, I'll give you the range, as little, let's see, baked in the cake, loss in Nashville as low as 14%, as high as 72% in Phoenix. On average, across the country, that's a 50 to 60% loss, which is what they're forecasting. Now, it gets a little more interesting. Remember, they're not looking at interest rates, location, or inventory. They're looking at the behavior of Americans based on age. And here are the three numbers. Please ask all the realtors you know. You will now know more than they know. When do Americans tend to buy their first house? That would be 31 from the Census Bureau. What were baby boomers doing in the early 80s when interest rates were what? 15, 16, 17% for a 30-year fix? You can't even imagine that. But notice those mid double digit interest rates on a 30-year loan was no impediment to boomers literally standing in line to buy a house. Nobody knows why, but we're just looking at what happened. And apparently there was a bell ringing in our heads that we need to buy a house. And so that's what we did, 31. Guess what happened 10 years later? Well, that's when most Americans step up from the starter house to the McMansion. Can't live without 5 bedrooms, 6 baths, 5,000 square feet, 2.25 acres, right? Creek running through
in
it.
two pools.
I know the story well. Yeah. Well, the good news, well, wait, first off, yes, 41 is the age when we bought the first house. So people think you're doing something different. You're doing what everybody else was doing at exactly the same time. Now, the prices in the Midwest from 20 to 24 have roughly tripled. On the coast, they've quadrupled. That's the good news. But now here's two of the pieces, or maybe three of the pieces that most of us aren't keeping our eye on the ball. First, average age of death in America is 76.4. So don't just look at your family, both sides of my family. It's well into their 90s. God bless them. They had resources, they had good health. But the average American is 76.4. And let's just notice Donald John Trump, my fellow Gemini, turned 77 last year. And on June 14th of this year, he turned 78. So this is an interesting place that we are crossing in real time with 76 million people. Number two, guess what happens at 78 for most American homeowners? Research, Census Bureau shows us that's the age most of us sell their homes. Really? Okay, that's number two. Number three is while those home prices in the Midwest were tripling and on the coast were quadrupling, you tell me what you think of this little factoid. The average income for the average American only went up 1.6 times. Do you think this is sustainable? I do not. I would say I'm going to be an optimist. It's going to take a while for 76 million people all to go to heaven. but that's where they're going. Okay. The inventory for housing is going to be pretty much like a flat man's EKG, pretty stable. Where do you think prices and rents are headed? Well, in that environment, it would be reasonable to not be surprised if prices and rents come down for the first time. You've not seen it before, but let's understand the only thing you have seen, the only thing your parents have seen, the only thing your grandparents have seen is a constant increase in the number of people in America. That's not happening anymore. And now we have roughly 24% of the population that are going to be going to heaven. So, in my opinion, looking at this data, remember they have nothing to sell. We're saying to people who have extra houses, if you don't love them, now may be the perfect time to leave them. Kind of like in Vegas, if you don't take your chips to the cashier, they don't really count for anything. So you count that equity as cash, but it's not, is it? Until you cash in what you're going to redeem out of the equity that you count as cash. It's not cash until you can actually count the cash. This might be
Yep.
a magnificent time to sell, but for millennials who are like, well, I want in, I'm going to say, well, if you want to have it, go ahead. But if it drops 50%, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now, would that be okay? If that's okay, go with God. If that doesn't sound like fun to you, this might be a good time to uh, keep your powder dry. Let's see if prices do drop, because you might want to catch the next wave. That's what I want. That's why I'm here. Let's not depress you with how you can be a distressed seller, as much as we want you to recognize when you can capture cash and buy from distressed sellers. Be prepared for that, because if these guys are right and the economy is going to turn cold, whoever happens to be president, it's not their fault, by the way, whoever it might be, like them, don't like them, doesn't matter. It's just the ordinary behavior of economies. Well, this is a time to be prepared to catch the next wave. And to do that, you need the cash.
John, what you just said there is probably going to trigger 90% of the audience. I know no thing that is more emotionally charging than talking about a house.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
talking about that. So what you're basically saying to everyone who, we all know what it is, right? If I buy a house, it's going to go up. It goes up
that's what it
100% of the
does.
time. If you say
That's what it's
anything,
always done.
it's always, and if John says something different, then that means I can write off John and everything he said thus far.
That's fine.
Because
By the way,
that's the average way that people think about things.
by the way, thanks to the research team, in '07, we weren't just preparing people for a stock market loss, we were preparing clients for a real estate debacle. And the research team said in '06, be not surprised to see home prices drop 40%. I think the evidence shows the loss across the country was about 34%. That's in the ballpark. Okay. And it took 6 years for the top to change to become the bottom. 6 years. It was a slow moving train wreck. But 34%, that's a big number. You want to be a buyer, not a seller at that low. And file this away. When we look at Japan, what we find is there are 11 million vacant homes. Now that sounds like a lot. But once you start getting into how these guys think, you kind of get inspired to go look around. Well, how many vacant homes are there in the US of A? Can't be that many, right? Well, it's a different number, but it surprises most of us that the number is it really 16 million vacant homes in the US of A? That's not in the news, is it? Well, maybe the NRA and the NAR are up to something, might be manipulating the data, maybe, I don't know, but that's what I see. And then let's dig a little bit further. Where are the most vacant homes? Well, everybody's moving to Florida, right? Can't be there. It must be New York. Nope, nope, nope. It's Florida, 1.7. And, wait, what? Are you serious? Yep, that's right. That's what I see. Go look for yourself. And California is in the number 2 spot, 1.2 vacant homes and apartments right here, right before your very eyes. So something is happening here. And the way I really like to help people kind of see again is to say, you've only seen 76 million people here. It's a whole new ball game as 76 million people don't need Whammos, don't need Mustangs, don't need houses. It's a whole new ball game. And that's what's happening right before our very eyes.
Yeah. So sometimes what I like to say when it comes to the housing market, and I'm at that age, and many millennials are, of I need to buy a house, and unfortunately becomes just a meme that you have in your brain of
Right.
everyone tells me I need to buy a house, I need to buy a house, and
Fear of missing
buying
out.
a house has working. It's FOMO. It's
Yes.
FOMO, and sometimes it's yes. We should. Can we buy a house? Should we buy a house? Maybe, probably at some point. But do we need to buy a house right now?
Well, and
Can we wait?
the other thing is, to your point, regardless if you have a house, regardless if you pay this house off, you still need two, three, $4 million outside the house somewhere to provide
Yep.
an income to live wherever you want to live. And if the house is sitting with all this equity that you're not using, really, I think, Chris, I think a lot of people are going to wake up, like I'm kind of joking, say, what else does the NRA and the NAR have in common other than their initials? I think some people are good. I think I'm seeing some of this with wealthy people. By the way, let's look at, speaking of wealthy, Warren Buffett. As I recall, he bought one house in Kansas, expanded it, bought another house in La Jolla, he sold it, and he's not high on buying and selling real estate. That's interesting. In fact, he says he did well on the house in La Jolla. I've seen the home, nice place, but he says I probably would have done better if I had bought stocks instead. So it's really
Yep.
what are you trying to do here? And regardless again of whether or not you have a house, whether or not it's paid for, it sucks up a lot of money. And look at expenses for everything these days. You don't know this because you're too young, but I remember talking to people in my neighborhood as a kid, and their Social Security payment was good. It was good
Yeah.
enough. They weren't rich, but they weren't poor. Now, what's your Social Security do for you at these levels, even $4,000 a month? What can you do with $4,000 a month? And by the way, on that note, the average household income in America is all of what, 77,000? And
Yeah.
the average
76,
spending, yeah,
77.
for Americans is 75, 76,000. You're not living that well. So if there is another depression, it will be painful. But for those on a fixed income, it might be a blessing in disguise.
Well, John, I'd like to thank you for joining us and teaching the audience today all that you did. I hope that you guys take away from what we said, from what John said here today. And while you may have a knee-jerk reaction to say, "Oh, John's wrong because I bought a house and my house always goes up," or "I bought a car and it always works out for me," don't discount everything that he said, because what he is using is actual statistics, actual numbers to try to predict what the future holds. And while no one has the crystal ball, not John, not I, not anyone that says that they know what the future holds, if someone tells you they know what the future holds, get the hell away from that person because they're going to lead you away. But he's using real information. So if you're the person in the comments who are going to say, "Oh no, I bought a house 4 years ago, and now look at me, it's doubled," you might be right, and that's great for you.
Yeah,
But
but
that doesn't mean that everyone else needs to do the exact same thing.
nor does it mean it's going to double again. Again,
Mhm.
if we go to when we go to Vegas, the chips don't count until we see the cashier. So the equity is not cash until you take your chips off the table. And you may discover if it's doubled in value or gone up over the last 4 years, this is a wonderful time to get that cash, that equity you count as cash, and redeploy it. And by the way, because this is often the next question that you'll get, Chris, is, well, what am I supposed to do with the money? Oh, whoa, wait, nobody told you had to do anything with the money. You don't have to sell high and buy high. I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying if you really want to play the game, you take your chips off the table, you collect your cash, and you keep that powder dry. Don't buy anything. Pay $5,000 a month for a rental. Okay. Oh, I'm losing money. Oh, yeah. It's all okay. You tell me if you have a $2 million house and you wake up and it's worth $1 million, woo, that's a million that just evaporated, and you probably will not recapture it. So if instead you came away with whatever you came away with after paying your loans, but you're just metering out $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year, 2, 3 years of that. Let's say that's 120 plus another 50. That's one. Let's say it's 200,000. Well, you tell me. Yeah, you want to pay the tax on the 2 million because you sold it at a profit and have $1 million in your hands, or pay and then pay $60,000, $200,000 a year to stay somewhere where you still have the cash, don't you? You have the real money, and you got to pay to live somewhere. So some people find it's an opportune time, as I say. If you don't love it, leave it, cash out, and don't do another buy in terms of a house. Let prices do what they do, see if they drop, and it's certainly much more fun to buy to sell high and buy low.
Before we close out, I want to go back to the financial literacy thing. And I think one of the big reasons, John, that most people aren't financially literate is nowadays we have so much information in our pocket. And unfortunately, every single person has an opinion. And I agree that everyone is entitled to their opinion. I may not like what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it. But just because everyone has an opinion, that does not mean that everyone's opinion is correct.
You know what? You'll like this. American Funds is advertising. They've been around forever, and I happened to be with the Capital Group downtown Los Angeles. They had a number of the portfolio counselors there to speak to the representatives, not to the public. And one of them was asked a question, and he took the microphone and said, "I don't know." Then he passed the microphone over to the next portfolio counselor. But before that woman could to take the mic, he said, "Hold on just a second, excuse me." He brought it back. He said, "Let me be more clear. The truth is, I do not have an informed opinion." I'm like, "Oh, go to the head of the class," because opinions are like belly buttons or other parts of your body. Everybody has one. What we want, certainly what I want, what Chris wants for ourselves and for you and everybody who wants to hear it, an informed opinion. That's what we want you to hear and to secure for yourself and pay attention. Develop your own rationale. Don't just repeat what somebody told you.
Yep. And that's the hardest part, right? And everyone wants the quick fix. They want to know what's the secret right now. And maybe the secret is there is no secret. And life
Well, the
is
secret
hard
is
and you have to
figure out.
work every day.
It's kind of like health, right? There's no secret to it. You get some good guidelines, but at the end of the day, you have to put in the work. You have to discover and maintain the consistency of how much water, what you're eating, how you're exercising every day, at least every week. You can't do any one of those things twice in a year and go, "Hey, I'm as healthy as I can be. I had 6 beers every year night for the last 6 years, but other than that, I'm really healthy." Maybe not. Think again.
It's the hardest thing in the world. And I think that's one thing that makes our profession so noble. And one of the reasons that so many people in our profession, or why people have such a negative connotation with financial advisors, because in my estimation, for too long did financial advisors walk into people's lives and say, you're out on your luck. You're not doing well. What you need right now is you need a hero. And I will be that hero as the financial advisor. But in truth,
But
the individual is the hero.
you,
And
you,
we as financial advisors are just the guide.
we're the
We can
guy.
never do anything. We can't care about retirement more than you. We
Yeah,
can't spend your
yeah.
money. We can't save your money. You need to do all that. You need to be your own hero.
And,
Listener.
and we should really check our egos at the door, Chris, because when I listen to my peers, our peers, well, my minimum is $3 million, please. Don't you think I mean, maybe that works. It doesn't work for me. I can't go there. It's not my background. But you've limited a whole lot of people. And I think you have set forth more reason for people to go, "You're not here to help. You're just trying to get rich on other people's money. And you have a high minimum where you get paid the most. That's kind of narcissistic, isn't it? It's all about you." Well, where's that appetite for helping ordinary people be affluent? That's the work we like to do. Everybody can win.
Yeah. And that's the reason that I want to bring you so badly on the podcast. Because unfortunately, John, there aren't many people out there like you. And I'm going to include myself on that. I'm going to be a little, narcissistic and say I'm there too, that want to genuinely help people. And the money is important. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
I wouldn't do this. Actually, I do this. I do the podcast, all this for free because I want to put this information out there. Obviously, I don't work for free because you have to pay me for my time because the one thing that I don't have a renewable source of is time. So
right.
that's where people pay you for it. But yeah, so John, before we close out, can you please tell the people where they could find you if they want to learn more about you, want to work with you, want to just talk to you? Where could they go?
Investors Advantage is in Westlake Village. YBPOR is a site it's easy to remember, WHYBEPOOR.com. Westlake Financial Advisors, if you want to have a conversation. By the way, if you'd like to check out my book, you're welcome to do so. It's available at Amazon, and you can see it's more like a beach entrance. I wasn't trying to, make this Encyclopedia Britannica, but making finance make sense is a way that I hope that people can see, hey, there's a way to get this done. And yeah, Chris, when you want to have the money doctor back, happy to do so. We can highlight some of the other areas that we think hold a lot of promise after we have made sure people can see that there's a better way to go. And please do not think you have to live with the losses. Please don't think that, because it's not true. The truth is there are various ways to limit the losses so that you don't run out of money before you run out of time, at least through age 100.
Before we close out, John, I have one final question. Obviously, as the FI guys, the financial independence guys, we are on a journey to try to teach as many people as we can that they too can achieve financial independence if they're willing to work hard, put in the work, get rid of all the BS stuff and just grind every single day. But what we come to the realization is that everyone has a different understanding as to what financial independence is to them. So, John, our final question would be, what is financial independence to you?
Well, you know what? The way I would put it, Chris, is it's an independent number. And one of the parts of that puzzle is for folks to, for the first time, I suspect, really recognize what kind of loss is acceptable. In other words, the industry is notorious. Are you conservative, moderate, or aggressive? I'm sorry. I don't understand the question. And I lose you trying to hear your answer. The parts are not meshing. Okay, they're not coming together. So rather than get lost in verbiage that nobody really understands, let's take it a step further. Let's perform, using some of that technology, a series of questions for you to ascertain, as I say, probably for the first time, what kind of loss is okay? Is it 70%? Is it 7%? Whatever it is, that's your number. And then let's see how it might work if we can prepare a portfolio that can move as you need it to move and perform within your specific parameters. That way you're not, stocked for the long haul and then it's off 70% and you're, well, a little disappointed. 700,000. Whee, that was fun, right? No. So yeah, let's let the financial independence for me is really helping people ascertain what kind of loss can you live with? And then is it possible for a portfolio to be designed to your specifications so that you can see, well, I said I was willing to stop digging at 12. We stopped digging at 10. I don't like the loss, but 10 is better than 12 and 12 is better than 20 or 30. So it's working like we wanted, like we were, that was our effort. Now we see the results and we can always change our mind. You want a little more heat, a little more cold, we can adjust the thermostat to your satisfaction. And sometimes people, their minds change, right? They see things differently.
Yeah.
They want more risk or they want less risk. All of those answers are just fine.
And ultimately, working with a good financial advisor should be that you're never losing control of your money. The financial advisor's job is to guide you, but ultimately it's your money. We guide, you decide. And if you're working with someone who's telling you this is what you're going to do, you should probably get out of that relationship, because that's not the way it should work.
What you have to live with, yeah. Seek a second opinion. That's what you do for the medical professionals, and they respect you for doing that. You might want to do that for yourself, regardless of whether or not the professional gives you a green light.
For sure. And if you're ever confused, I always recommend looking at the incentive. What is the incentive of the advisor? If they're a product salesperson and they're trying to sell you a product, we probably know what the incentive is. It was Charlie Munger, the one said, you show me someone's incentive, I'll show you the outcome.
And to Chris's point, ask for there to be a revelation of all of the expenses, not just what the advisor receives, but expenses within the position that you might be holding. For example, with stock funds, people like to rely on the prospectus. Well, that gives you the majority of the expenses. But one of the things the prospectus, none of them reveal, and it's for good reason, are the trading costs. So when they move you out of this professional stock to that professional bond or that other stock, okay, there's a trading cost to get out of that stock and to buy the next holding bond or stock. Doesn't matter. But that's an internal cost, and it changes from year to year depending on which kind of mutual fund you're using. But it's one of those things that, frankly, most of us, if we know, we don't reveal. But you want to know exactly what you're paying for. I was just with a client earlier today where we discovered that her fees were approaching 3% annually, all in. She didn't have a clue, and she has high respect for her friend, but she didn't realize how expensive her friend was as compared to competition.
Yeah, that's some of the hardest things when it comes down to an advisor that is my friend or my I've been with this person for 30 years. When sometimes people are faced with that reality, it's too much to handle for some people.
Yeah.
But
and if I didn't say it's 3% per year, that was the annual cost, all in. Advisor, the platform fee, all things. But most of the times, people don't see all of the expenses, and it's a cost you're paying. And as I say, the real question is it a cost worth paying? Is it doing what you needed to do? It's a fair question.
Yeah, I think, if we just do the rule of 72 and we have a portfolio that's returning 7%, and now we take out 3% to fees, now we're really only making 4%. And that rule of 72 just got a lot longer to double your money. And what was that going to mean over generations?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
thank you, John, for sorry.
No, I was going to say, that's part of the question. Is this report, does it reflect the fees, or is this gross? Is this before fees, right? Uh, that's what's important. But yeah, Chris, great to be on. Look forward to being on again. And I love the work that you're doing. And I'm sure that the following you have loves you for doing the work you're doing. Good to know you.
I do my best. I think it's my purpose in life to try to take these concepts that were unfortunately hidden away for too long and try to bring it to the masses for someone that doesn't have a perverse incentive, is actually trying to help the world. So, John, thank you so much for coming on. We'll definitely have you back. For those of you listening on YouTube, Spotify, whatever platform you're on, please leave a comment, share a like, and most importantly, the fee for the show is please tell a friend about the Fi Guys. Bring someone on along with you on this journey of financial independence, because you go so much farther if you go with a friend.
Yeah.
And with that,
there's a Nigerian proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's what you're talking about. Absolutely. Amen.
yes. And this journey of financial independence, it is often not a fast one. It is a long one. It is hard. And sometimes having a friend with you is going to be all the thing in the world to get you to where you want to go. So, John, thank you so much again.
An agile friend, not just a friend, right?
Yes.
We'll go there. Yeah. Let me show you my work. Okay. No guesswork here. We're not playing the shell game. No, we're not. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you so much. And everyone who's listening, we'll see you later.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.